4 years ago, the most powerful man in the room told her she was replaceable. He said it quietly, the way people say things they've already decided, the way you tell someone the weather. No anger in it, just fact. She had stood in his office on the 43rd floor with the city laid out behind him like he owned that too, and she had understood, in the specific way that certain moments carve themselves into you, that he meant it completely. She left that night, not because she was weak, because she was paying attention. She took nothing that was his. She left the ring on the kitchen counter, the one he'd given her at a rooftop dinner she'd thought was romantic and now understood had been logistical. She drove south with 2 bags and a silence so deep she could hear her own pulse. She didn't cry until she crossed the Virginia state line, and even then it was brief, the kind of crying that has nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the body finally being allowed to register what the mind has already processed. She built something new in a town called Crestfall, North Carolina, the kind of small coastal place that appeared on no one's radar and suited her exactly because of it. She opened a practice. Pediatric medicine, which she'd trained for and set aside when his life required her to be decorative and available and good at dinner parties. She found a house with a porch that faced the water. She learned the names of her neighbors. She got very good over the following years at being exactly who she was in exactly the place she'd chosen. And she did not look back, not really, not until the morning her daughter said the name. If you've ever built a whole life to outrun a single person, stay until the end. Like this video, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The morning it fell apart started like every Thursday started in Crestfall. Gray sky, salt in the air, the particular quiet of a coastal town that hasn't woken up yet. Autumn had come in hard that year, the kind that stripped the leaves fast and left the trees looking skeletal against the pale sky. Adelaide Cross, or Doctor. Cross to her patients, or just Addie to the 3 people in town who'd gotten past her professional courtesy, was already behind schedule and she hadn't left the house yet. She had 1 sock on. This was not unusual. Maisie. She said it to the kitchen generally, because Maisie was somewhere in the kitchen and probably doing something that would not help their timeline. 5 minutes, I know. Her daughter's voice came from approximately the direction of the pantry. I'm finding my snack. Your snack is in your backpack. A pause. Oh, Addie found the second sock, put it on, and poured what remained of the coffee into a travel cup that had once had a lid and now didn't, which meant she would drink it carefully and burn her lip anyway. Maisie appeared from the pantry with the particular expression of a 6-year-old who has just been caught in a small logical failure and is declining to acknowledge it. She had her backpack on and her rain boots, which were on the wrong feet, and Addie made the calculation that switching them would cost more time than it was worth. Ready? Addie said. Ready, Maisie said, with the confidence of someone whose boots were on correctly. They walked the 4 blocks to Maisie's school every morning that Addie wasn't on call, which was most mornings. The practice was 6 minutes from the school in the other direction. She'd arranged it that way on purpose, the same way she'd arranged most things since Crestfall, with the specific logic of someone who had learned, the hard way, that a life without contingencies was just a disaster in waiting. Maisie walked fast for a 6-year-old, a trait she had not inherited from Addie, who was constitutionally unhurried, and had instead arrived with from somewhere that Addie did not examine too carefully. She had her father's dark hair and his way of observing things before she spoke about them, a quality that was charming in a child and had been, Addie now understood, something more complicated in the man. The rains started 2 blocks from school, not heavy, just the persistent coastal kind that got into everything. Mom. Maisie had stopped walking. Addie almost walked into her. What? That man is looking at us. Her daughter's voice had gone quiet in the way it went, when she was trying to process something she didn't have words for. Addie had learned to pay attention to that register. She looked up. He was standing on the opposite side of the street near a black car she hadn't noticed. He was in a coat, no umbrella, and he was very still in the way that certain people were still, not at rest, but contained. Like stillness was a decision he'd made rather than a state he'd fallen into. His hair was darker than she remembered, Or maybe memory had been merciful about the details. He was broader than 4 years ago, or her mind had miniaturized him in the intervening time, the way it did with things that had hurt you, quietly reducing them to a size that was easier to live alongside. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Maisie, and Addie's chest did something it hadn't done in 4 years, something old and ugly and specific to him, a recognition that ran below thought, below choice, that fired on instinct before her mind had finished processing what her eyes were sending it. Fletcher Hale was standing 40 feet away on a rain-soaked street, in a town he had no reason to be in, and he was staring at her daughter with an expression she had never seen on his face before. The rain kept falling. A car passed. Someone somewhere dropped something metal. The world did not pause for the convenience of her understanding it. She put her hand on Maisie's shoulder. "Don't stare, baby." Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "We're going to be late. Do you know him?" Maisie said, because Maisie always noticed the things Addie was trying to manage around. "Let's walk," Addie said. She walked her daughter to school without looking back. She signed the drop-off sheet with a steady hand. She smiled at the front desk aide, a woman named Deb, who had a particular radar for distress that Addie had spent 18 months carefully avoiding triggering. She said the normal things. She left. She stood on the sidewalk outside the school and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel whatever needed to be felt. Then she set it aside with the practiced efficiency of someone who had built a life that required her to be functional, regardless of what was happening underneath, and she walked to the practice. She saw patients until noon. A toddler with an ear infection, a 7-year-old with a rash that was contact dermatitis, and not, as his mother had become convinced, something she'd read about on a wellness forum. Twins with back-to-back well visits, a boy and a girl, who sat on opposite ends of the exam table and argued without pausing about whose turn it was to pick the cartoon. She gave equal attention to each of them and noted, in the back of her mind, the importance of that. Fletcher was in the waiting room at 12:15. She knew because Lorraine, her front desk coordinator, came back to the hallway with the specific expression she used when something was happening that she hadn't been trained for. "There's a man," Lorraine said. "He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he'll wait. He said to tell you his name." Addie was very still. "Fletcher Hale," Lorraine said. "Tell him I'm with a patient. You don't have anyone until 1. Tell him I'm with a patient." He waited. She knew because Lorraine updated her twice with the delicate professionalism of someone who had correctly assessed that this was not a situation she should ask questions about. At 12:47, Addie walked out to the waiting room because the alternative was letting this particular thing fester for however long he'd decided to be patient. And Fletcher Hale, she remembered, had a very specific kind of patience, the kind that was less about peace and more about certainty. He waited for things because he was confident they would come to him. He looked up when she walked in. He stood. This surprised her, not because it was unusual, but because it was automatic, the kind of thing a person did before they decided to do it, and Fletcher, in her experience, decided everything. "Adelaide," he said. "You need to make an appointment," she said. "This is a pediatric practice. I know what it is." He looked at her in a way that she recognized, measured and careful. "I need to talk to you. You had 4 years to talk to me. I know." Something about the flatness of it stopped her. Not an excuse, not an explanation, just acknowledgement, clean and direct, like a man who had already been through the argument with himself and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. "Not here," she said. They went to the coffee shop 2 doors down. She ordered nothing. He ordered 2 coffees and set one in front of her anyway, and she didn't touch it for a long time. "How did you find me?" she said. "I wasn't looking for you." He said it without apology, but also without satisfaction. "I was looking into a property acquisition outside Beaufort. Someone on my team ran into a woman at a charity event last spring who mentioned a Dr. Cross in Crestfall." A pause. She showed him a photo. "It was you." Addie said nothing. "I told myself it didn't matter," Fletcher said. 3 times, over 6 months. I had a whole argument built for why I was going to let it go. What changed? He looked at her. I saw her. The coffee sat between them. "She has." He stopped. He started again with the particular care of someone choosing words that were precise rather than easy. She has my mother's jaw. I didn't know what it was at first. I thought I was wrong. I drove past the school twice before I believed what I was looking at. Addie looked at the table. Don't, Adelaide. You told me I was replaceable, she said. Her voice was level. It had taken a long time to make it level when she said these things, and she had done the work, quietly, over 4 years, and she was not going to let him undo it in a coffee shop on a Thursday afternoon. You said it like it was something you'd decided before I was even in the room, and then I wasn't in the room anymore, and that was something I chose, Fletcher. I chose that. I know. She is mine, Addie said. She has always been mine. I built a life for her that has nothing in it that can be taken away by someone who thinks the world operates on their schedule. I'm not here to take anything, he said. Then, what are you here for? He looked at her, and the thing in his face was not what she expected. Not the controlled certainty she'd known, not the boardroom composure that had made her feel. Slowly, and then all at once, like she was a variable in someone else's equation. It was something unsteady, something that had not been there before. I don't know, he said. I honestly do not know. I just couldn't keep driving past. She didn't answer. She got up and walked back to the practice. She saw her 1 o'clock, and her 2 o'clock, and her 3 o'clock, and at 4 she sat in her car in the parking lot for 11 minutes before she drove home. Maisie was at her after-school program until 5. Addie had those 50 minutes, and she did not use them well. She sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water she didn't drink, and she thought about the version of herself that had stood in that apartment 4 years ago and taken the ring off and understood, with the clarity of someone who has just been handed the truth without asking for it, that she was not the priority and never had been. She had not been wrong. She was still not wrong. And the complication of that, the specific exhaustion of being right about a thing that had cost you enormously, was not something she had a good system for. She picked Maisie up at 5. Her daughter talked for the entire car ride about a girl in her class named Sutton who had a hamster, and whether it was possible to also have a hamster, and whether hamsters and cats could be friends. Probably not, Addie said. But maybe, she allowed. At dinner, Maisie said abruptly, in the way children inserted things into silences when they'd been waiting to, "Who was that man this morning?" Addie set her fork down carefully. "Someone I used to know. Were you friends?" "We knew each other," Addie said, which was true, and also not the whole truth, but 6 years old was not the age for the whole truth. Maisie considered this. She had a way of thinking through things that was visible, a small stillness, a particular angle to her head, and Addie both loved it and found it, at moments like this, deeply inconvenient. "He was staring at me a lot," Maisie said. "I know. Is that weird?" "It's a lot," Addie said. "Yes." Maisie accepted this with the practicality she brought to assessments she'd already decided on. "Okay," she said, and went back to eating. Addie didn't sleep well. She hadn't expected to. Fletcher came back. She'd also, in the part of herself she kept below conscious thought, not expected to be surprised by that either. He came to the practice at closing time on Friday. Not the waiting room this time, the parking lot. He was leaning against a car that was not the same black one she'd seen the day before, which was either coincidence or a decision, and with Fletcher she'd learned to assume the latter. "You can't keep showing up places," she said. "I know." He didn't move. "I won't. I just needed to say one thing." She waited. "I was wrong," he said. "What I said. The way I operated. I treated you like you were part of a system I was managing instead of a person I was supposed to be choosing, and I was wrong. And I have known that for a long time, and I understand if it doesn't matter." The evening was cold. The parking lot lights had come on. "It doesn't fix anything," she said. "I'm not trying to fix anything," he said. "I'm trying to be accurate." "What do you want, Fletcher?" "I want to know her," he said, "if that's possible. At whatever speed and in whatever format you decide. I'm not asking for anything else." A pause. "I would like to know her." She said nothing for a long time. "I'll think about it." It took her 3 weeks. She thought about it the way she thought about difficult diagnoses, from multiple directions, running the same data through different frameworks, looking for the things she'd missed. She talked to no one, because there was no one in Crestfall who knew enough context to be useful. She thought about Maisie, primarily. What Maisie deserved to know and when and from whom. She thought about the specific cruelty of making a 6-year-old carry a secret that was too big for her, and the different cruelty of giving her a father who wasn't safe to rely on. She called him. She said, "This will be on Maisie's terms. You will not make promises you don't keep. You will not appear and disappear. If you start this, you will not stop it because it becomes inconvenient. If you break her trust, I will not give you another chance to do it, and I will mean that, Fletcher. I will mean it completely." He said yes. She said, "Then come Sunday, for an hour. We'll see." He came Sunday. He was there at 2, and she had told him to, and she noted that he did not arrive early, which would have been an imposition, and did not arrive late, which would have been a statement. Maisie was in the living room with her colored pencils and a drawing she was working on, which was a house on a cliff she'd invented and was adding to incrementally over several weeks. Addie said, "There's someone here to meet you." Maisie looked up. She assessed Fletcher with the directness that 6-year-olds hadn't yet learned to disguise. He stood in the doorway and did not crouch down or perform warmth in the way that adults sometimes did with children, the slightly exaggerated version of themselves that kids always saw through. He just stood there and let himself be looked at. "Hi," Maisie said. "Hi," Fletcher said. "Are you the man from the street?" "Yes." "Mom said you used to know each other." "We did." Maisie looked at him for another beat. Then she looked at Addie with the specific expression she used for assessments she wanted confirmed. Addie nodded once. Maisie turned back to her drawing. "Do you know how to draw horses?" she said. "I can't get the legs right." Fletcher looked briefly at Addie. She kept her expression neutral, which was not easy. "I can try," he said. He sat down on the floor beside her daughter and looked at the drawing. He did not do well with the horse legs. He was, it turned out, not a skilled illustrator, and this made Maisie laugh in the unguarded way. She laughed when something genuinely surprised her. "That doesn't look like a horse," she said. "I know," he said. "It looks like a table." "Also accurate," he said. Maisie fixed it herself, with the patient authority of someone who had identified a skill gap and decided to bridge it. Fletcher watched her draw. Addie stood in the kitchen doorway and watched both of them, and she did not name what she was feeling because she was not ready to name it. He stayed for the hour she had said. He left when the hour was done, without being asked to go, and that too was something she noticed. What happened in the months after that was not simple. She had not expected it to be. There was a woman, and Addie had to find this out, the way you found out things you hadn't asked about. Not from Fletcher, but from a mutual acquaintance who appeared at a hospital gala. Addie attended for professional reasons and said things that were probably intended as information but landed as knives. A woman named Sylvie, who had been in Fletcher's life during the years Addie had been in Crestfall, who had presented herself to the mutual acquaintance as something ongoing. Addie went home from the gala and sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning. The anger she had kept organized and useful for 4 years came apart in the worst way. Not the clean, clarifying kind, but the complicated kind. The kind that had grief underneath it, and grief had an address again, which was the problem with letting something back in. She called him the next morning. She said what she knew. She said it plainly because she had always been plain when it mattered. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sylvie ended 6 months ago. Before I came to Crestfall, I should have told you directly." "Yes," she said. "You should have." I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like a justification for what I was asking. "It would have been information," she said, "not a justification. Those are different things." Another silence. "You're right," he said. "I handled it wrong." She hung up and didn't call him back for 10 days. She let Maisie's weekly hour with him continue, because stopping it was not something she was willing to do to Maisie over something that was between her and Fletcher. She was careful about that line. She held it. When she called him back, she said, "I need you to be someone who tells me the things I need to know, not to protect your position, just as a baseline. I can work with most things, Fletcher. I cannot work with managed information," he said. "I understand," she said. "Do you?" he said, after a pause. "I'm learning to." The adjustment was slow and imperfect and punctuated by moments where one or both of them handled something badly and had to go back and name it. He had an instinct for solving problems without consulting her that surfaced at inconvenient moments. She had an instinct for self-sufficiency that sometimes read as shutout when she didn't intend it that way. They were two people who had been, separately, very competent at managing their lives alone, and the friction of intersection was real. But Maisie was growing up in the middle of it. And Maisie was a child who brought the particular grace of someone who had decided she already knew what she wanted. She added Fletcher to her drawings gradually. The way she added things she'd decided were permanent. First at the edge of scenes, then closer. Then, by January, in the middle, which was how Addie knew something had shifted in her daughter's inner accounting. The woman from the gala, the one who delivered the information about Sylvie, came back. Not to Addie directly, but to Maisie's school. She appeared at pickup one Tuesday afternoon. Addie wasn't there. Addie was with a patient, and she told the front desk that she was a family friend, that she was picking Maisie up on Adelaide's behalf. The front desk aide, a meticulous woman who had been doing this job for 9 years and who took the pickup authorization list as something approaching scripture, said, "I need to see the authorization form." The woman did not have one. She was not on the list. The aide said she would need to call the parent to verify, and while she was calling, Addie answered on the second ring and said clearly that she had not authorized any alternative pickup and that no one should release her daughter to anyone not on the form. The woman left before security was called, but only just. Addie was shaking by the time she got to the school. Maisie was fine, perfectly fine, sitting in the office eating a graham cracker with the composure of someone who had been told there was a small mix-up and had decided to eat a snack while adults sorted it out. But the shaking didn't stop until they were in the car. Fletcher came when she called him. He was there in 20 minutes, which meant he'd been in the area, which meant he'd been making himself available without announcing it, and that was a thing she would address later but could not address right now. "Vanessa," he said when she described the woman. The name came out flat, the way names came out when someone was managing something beneath the surface. "Who is she?" he exhaled. "My former business partner's wife. Or ex-wife, technically. There's a dispute over an asset transfer that she believes involves me. She's not stable." He looked at her. "I didn't think she knew about Maisie. She does now." "Yes," he looked at his hands. "This is my problem to fix." "It's our problem," Addie said, "because it walked into my daughter's school." "Our problem," he said, and he said it without flinching, and that too was something she noticed. He handled it, and she watched him handle it, and there was a version of the next several weeks she had not anticipated. Fletcher dealing with something consequential and difficult, and doing it in a way that was direct and thorough, and involved telling her things she needed to know without waiting for her to ask. She did not know what to do with this. She sat with it, the way she sat with diagnoses that changed her working theory. She let it be information. Vanessa did not come back. Fletcher had made certain of it, through his attorney, through hers, through a process. Addie didn't ask the details of, and he didn't volunteer. What she understood was that it was handled, and that the handling had cost him something, and he hadn't asked her to acknowledge that. He had just done it. In March, Maisie asked if she could call him something other than Fletcher. They were at breakfast. Addie was on her second coffee. Maisie was eating cereal with the focused attention of someone who had been thinking about something for a while and had chosen this moment to surface it. "What do you want to call him?" Addie said. Maisie thought about it. "I don't know yet," she said. "Is that okay?" "That's okay," Addie said. "You can figure it out." Maisie went back to her cereal. "I just don't want it to be weird," she said. "What kind of weird? Like, if I call him something, does that mean something?" Addie looked at her daughter, 6 years old, working through a question that was genuinely complicated, with more care than a lot of adults brought to it. "It means what you decide it means," she said. "Nothing else unless you say so." Maisie nodded, filed this, went back to breakfast. She figured it out 3 weeks later, on a Sunday evening when Fletcher was leaving after dinner, which had started happening on Sundays because Maisie had asked if it could happen on Sundays, and Adelaide had said yes, because saying no would have required a reason she didn't have. He was at the door, coat on, and Maisie said from the kitchen, "Bye, Dad." The word was matter of fact, not a test, not a question, just a word she'd chosen and used. He stopped. Addie saw it from the hallway, the pause in him, the way his hand stopped halfway to the door handle, the slight change in his posture that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with the body receiving something it had been waiting for. "Good night, Maisie," he said. His voice was even. Addie heard what was underneath it anyway. He closed the door. She stood in the hall for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen where Maisie was putting her cup in the sink and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said. The summer was not clean. She had not expected it to be. There was still the accounting to do, the math of the years she'd spent in Crestfall without him, the years Maisie had spent not knowing, the specific cost of that which was real, even when it wasn't spoken about. She felt it at odd moments, in the middle of a Tuesday, during a run, at 2 in the morning when the house was quiet and the math wanted to be done. She didn't suppress it. She'd learned in the hardest possible way that suppressed things didn't go anywhere. They just moved to rooms you hadn't cleaned out. Fletcher made mistakes. Not large ones, but real ones. She made her own. They found slowly a language for naming them that didn't require one person to be wrong and the other to be right. This was harder than the other things and also more useful than any of them. By August, she had stopped keeping the emotional inventory she'd maintained since the day she left. Not because the items on it didn't matter, but because she'd reviewed them enough times to know them by heart, and carrying them actively was something she could put down without losing them. She told him this on a Thursday evening on the back porch, which had become, without either of them deciding it, the place where the real conversations happened. Maisie was asleep. The water was dark and calm, the way it got when the summer was winding toward itself. "I spent a long time being ready to leave," she said. "Like that was the thing I was maintaining. The readiness." "I know," he said. "I don't want to maintain it anymore." She looked at the water. "That's not the same as saying it goes away. The cost of those years is still real. I'm not subtracting it. I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm just saying I'm going to stop running the calculation every time." He was quiet for a moment. The waves did what waves did, indifferent and present. "What made you decide?" She thought about it. "Maisie," she said. "And honestly, you. Not the version of you from before, the version that has been here." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard before that first night he'd sat on her daughter's floor with a horse that looked like a table. "I don't deserve the credit yet." "No," she said. "But you're building toward it. That's different from not starting." They didn't rush the rest of it. There was no tidy moment where things arrived at resolution and the accounting closed. Real things didn't do that. There were mornings that were harder than others, and conversations that required them to come back to the same rooms more than once, and an ongoing negotiation between the version of her that had built a life alone and the version that was learning to let it have another person in it. But Maisie drew a new picture that fall. The same cliff house she'd been drawing for 2 years, the same water below it. This time there were 4 figures outside the front door. She added the 4th one without comment and put it on the refrigerator with the same magnet she used for her best work. Addie looked at it on a Sunday morning while the coffee brewed. The 4th figure had dark hair, which was accurate. He was in the middle of the group, not at the edge. She heard Maisie in the other room explaining to Fletcher that the horse on page 7 of her book was not anatomically correct, and that someone at the publisher should probably know that. She heard Fletcher say, seriously, that he agreed and that she should write a letter. She heard Maisie say that she would need help with the spelling. She heard Fletcher say he could help with that. Addie poured her coffee. She didn't try to name what she was feeling because some things were better understood than named, and this was one of them. The water was doing what water did outside the porch window. Indifferent and ongoing, present the way things were present when they'd decided to stay. And in the kitchen of a house that had been hers alone and was becoming something else, with her daughter's laughter carrying in from the next room and a piece of sea glass on the windowsill that Maisie had found on the beach last spring, and presented to her with the gravity of a thing she'd specifically been looking for, Adelaide Cross, let the math go. Not the memory of it, not the truth of it, just the running of it, the daily arithmetic of what it had cost. The future was still hers. The coffee was hot, the child was laughing, and the man in the living room, the one who had learned to sit on the floor and fail at horses and tell her the things she needed to know without waiting to be asked, was still there. Still there. That was enough to begin with. That was, she had decided, exactly enough.